Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about CFL expansion, a topic I haven't covered in a couple of years on the channel. One of my first videos was talking about a potential team in Atlantic Canada and why I thought at the time that that dream was dead. But I think some recent news has revived the conversation, and let's talk about it. So first, I wanted to go into why I think the CFL should pursue expansion, what are the motivations behind it, then go over some of the challenges that it could face, as well as some of the candidate cities or markets that the CFL could explore. So starting first, why the CFL would pursue expansion in the first place, and there are many reasons. So starting with the first reason here I have on the board, and that is that if they expanded by one team, they would have 5 games per week, or most weeks other than the weeks that you'd have bye weeks. And I think this is just a simple reason. More games equals more money for the CFL, adds more value to the TV contract for advertisers, more advertising slots, more gate revenue. Just simple math. I think this would benefit the CFL in a positive way to have another team in there, and it would just ultimately equal more money in the end for the league. You'd also have even number of teams in each division. You'd have 5 in the East, 5 in the West, and I think in that sense that it would validate the current playoff format that the CFL currently has. I mean, currently where it stands with 6 of the 9 teams making the playoffs, with that crossover rule with 5 teams in one conference and then 4 teams in the other division. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but when you add a 5th team to the East, I think it balances out. You could still have the crossover rule for when one division is particularly stronger than the other, but I think it would validate the current playoff format, make more of a playoff race each season, and I think that would be great for interest in the regular season in the CFL, because I think that's one of the biggest complaints about the CFL as it stands. There's just not as much of a playoff race with the way that the format currently stands. And I think that this would be a good change for the CFL if they were to add another team. Now, another benefit I think that would come out of expansion, and this is more of in a larger sense, I think it gives the CFL a sense of growth, and I think that it would promote the league in terms of bringing press to it. Anytime there's an expansion team in sports, especially for a league like the CFL, it's a 9-team league, hasn't expanded since 2014. I think that would bring a lot of press to the CFL, the last major expansion effort, because really the Ottawa expansion in 2014 was more of a re-establishment of a team in Ottawa that had been there for a long time, obviously under a new name in the Red Blacks, but I think the last major expansion push was in the 90s with the U.S. expansion. I think that adding a 10th team would get, the press talking about the CFL a little bit again, and I think that would be huge, especially in completing the national map if they were to expand to Halifax, like I was mentioning before. So really interested to see from that sense how expansion would affect the CFL. I also think flexibility would be a huge benefit to why the league would explore expansion. I think that would allow the league to do some creative things with the schedule, much more creative things than what they can do now when it's 9 teams. They really have to, mix the schedule around really just to make it work as it currently stands, but you'd have an even number of teams, 10 teams. You would eliminate the first and last week buys of the regular season, which have been a pain in the ass the last several years in the CFL ever since Ottawa came in. Just really disappointing if you're a fan of a team and you're like, all right, I'm really excited for the season to start, or I'm really excited for the last week of the season. Oh wait, my team doesn't play. I think that has been a major deterrent in the CFL the last couple of years since Ottawa's been in the league here. So I think having a 10th team from that reason alone would be huge, and I think that would be a big benefit to the CFL going forward. And then the final reason I have here, and there are other ones as well, I probably glossed over some of those, but this is more of a minor thing. BC would get a Labor Day weekend game. Now, I don't think the game would actually be on Labor Day. I think you would still have the Hamilton, Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton games on the Monday, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg on the Sunday. But I think that, forever BC has been the team that, ever since Ottawa came back in the league in recent years, they're the team that always misses out on the most popular weekend of the year. And I think that, no matter who gets the expansion team, that 10th team, it would allow BC to have a game on that weekend and be a part of that the league that weekend, which they've traditionally had to sit out. I think that would be big for that franchise in particular. So, I mean, it would be very unorthodox rivalry, especially if it's a Halifax versus BC. You could have like a coast to coast rivalry kind of thing there. But at the end of the day, I do think that would help BC, and it would be a big benefit to the league to have all the teams in the league playing on the biggest weekend of the year. So those are all reasons why I think the CFL should explore expansion, but there are obviously some major challenges and roadblocks for a league like the CFL into expanding into other parts of the country. So I think there's three major issues. Obviously, this is not all inclusive. I think there are other potential roadblocks as well. But I think it really boils down to these three things, these three overarching things. One is the facility. Where are your team, or where is the team going to play, the potential expansion team? And this has probably been the biggest problem so far in the last 10 years or so when we're talking about this Atlantic Canada team. Where is this team going to play? You have to have somewhat of a modern facility, a professional facility that just doesn't exist in a lot of markets in Canada. And I think, when you're talking about building these projects, most of the time it involves public money, taxpayer money, to be included in as part of the cost of that project. So I'm really interested to see if this ever comes to fruition anywhere in the CFL or in markets that currently don't have a CFL team, because that would be a huge development for the CFL. But this is a major problem, and one that they're trying to alleviate in Halifax, and we'll talk about that more in a second. The second issue here is ownership, which really basically means financial backing. And I think this is also a major question mark when you're talking about a team out east or anywhere really. You need to have a guy that's willing, a person that's willing to invest heavily in the team, especially in the beginning years. When Ottawa came in, you had a guy named Jeff Hunt that really heavily invested in the team, was really the spokesperson in trying to lead the charge to get Ottawa a CFL team back, and I think that was really huge for that organization in establishing that team. So we're going to have to see, an owner really step up to really champion this expansion team, to add a 10th team to the CFL. And then the third thing here is having a sizable population base that has interest in having a CFL team. And I think this is also a huge question because the CFL is not really known for having the greatest demographics the last couple decades. I think they're kind of trending in the wrong direction. I'm really interested to see if the CFL does take that leap of faith, expand in one of these markets. They get the first two reasons here satisfied. Does these markets, or do these markets that they expand into, do they have the interest that is needed to support a team in the short and long term? And I think that is ultimately the question that probably won't be answered until a team is actually in a new market. So we'll have to see if the CFL can satisfy these three main things to make a 10th team work. Now, with the why and the challenges out of the way, let's talk about some candidates to potentially have a CFL team in the future, starting with the most talked about one, and that is Halifax / the Atlantic Canada region. I think the obvious thinking here is it completes the national map. It's really the only big area in Canada that has somewhat of a sizable population that does not currently have a CFL team. I think the CFL sees value in that, and that's why they have been talking about expanding there for so long. Basically, the history here, and I won't dive particularly into the specifics here, but I'll just go over the brief history here. They've discussed having a team in Halifax or the Atlantic Canada region for decades. I believe it started back in the 1980s with the name the Atlantic Schooners, conditionally granted an expansion team. But that kind of fizzled out, but that was renewed in the 2010s with interest with a group named Schooner Sports and Entertainment. And looks like there was a positive push towards having a CFL team there in Halifax. In 2019, the City Council of Halifax approved conditional funding for a stadium that was proposed. They hadn't decided on a site for the stadium. It wasn't completely super far along, but the conditional funding was approved by the city council. But when COVID struck, that ultimately was pulled away. That funding was pulled away. So that was when I made that video a couple of years ago explaining why I thought that potential possibility was dead. But the reason why I've decided to do this video today, and one of the major reasons why I decided to do this video anyway, the conversation has ultimately shifted from making that a permanent stadium in Halifax to making a pop-up stadium on the campus of St. Mary's University in Halifax, where it would be a joint facility, obviously with the university and the CFL, using it for about 5 to 10 years until they find a permanent solution. And I think this is a much more realistic entry to the market for the CFL. It would allow them to do it much more cost effective. I don't know what the numbers would be to build a pop-up stadium, slightly more enhanced stadium than the one that they currently have there at St. Mary's, but it should be interesting to see if this ever gets pushed through. I think that the CFL is really invested, like I said, in getting that 10th team, so they're probably exploring every avenue. And I think when I heard this, it really, renewed my optimism about potentially getting a 10th team out there, because this seems like a lot more realistic of an avenue. This could also allow the CFL to expand in the short term to Halifax, because I think that could be completed in like a year or two, I believe it said. I think even less than that, possibly, from what I was reading. So it should be interesting to see if that pop-up stadium in Halifax ever comes to fruition, because it's more of a realistic option to get into the market in the short term and build continuity within that community before asking the city council again for more public money to throw into potential long-term stadium project there. So I do think this is more of a realistic approach to potentially getting a team out there. I think there's still a long way to go. There's questions about, does it have that ownership backing that I was talking about before? Does it have that population base with interest in the CFL? That remains to be seen. But if you can fix this facility issue, I think that would be huge to potentially getting a team out there and adding a 10th team to the CFL. So Halifax in Atlantic Canada is obviously the major talking point when it comes to expansion in the CFL, but there are other markets that have been discussed as well, such as Quebec City. Obviously, you have good college football culture there with U Sports, with Laval having such success over the years and having one of the best attendances, if not the best attendance in U Sports. So I think that's intriguing from that perspective, but you have all these questions with the facility, ownership, population base with interest. This is so not far along at all. The CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie has floated out the possibility of having a team in Quebec City, but there just really doesn't seem like there's anything there to grab onto just yet. I think if expansion happens in the next 5 years or so, it is only really going to be Halifax. I think these other three possibilities I'm going to talk about here just really don't have anything to grab onto yet to potentially say this is going to happen in the immediate to near future. There's also the possibility I always want to mention is London and Windsor. I always say, because I lived in Windsor, if Windsor and London were just about a little bit closer together, I think that would be an ideal spot for a CFL team. But unfortunately, London is closer to Hamilton than it is to Windsor. So you can't really count London and Windsor as one market. And you can't really reliably expect people to commute from one place to the other to see a CFL game. So I don't think that would work in the long term at all, or really in the short term, I don't think. But I do think there's football interest in Windsor and London. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's really that population base all in one spot to support a CFL team. And then the last one, people will hate that I bring this up, but, when the CFL needs all these things to happen, the why, why would they need expansion? There's such a desperate need to get to 10 teams. What if this Halifax Atlantic Canada thing doesn't work? What if Quebec City never materializes? What if London and Windsor are any other market in Canada doesn't materialize, I think they still want to get to 10 teams. So maybe they reopen the conversation of having a team in America like they did in the 1990s. Obviously, it was a disaster. I think one of the major problems was that they expanded by so many teams into some really untraditional markets, like Shreveport, Louisiana was one of them. I think that, it wasn't really done the best. And I think if they were more calculated, they'd choose one or two teams, or three teams, or just one team to expand into the States this time. I think it could work if they find the right situation. I throw it in a city like Detroit, potentially. I know they have a football team and they do have a USFL team as well, but who knows how long that will last. Just throwing it out there for the future. Those cities that are more along the border, or close to it, one of the northern states, I think those would probably work the best. But you still have to find something with a sizable population base to support a team. So I'm really interested to see what happens with expansion in the future in the CFL. It's a really interesting topic. I mean, I don't see anything happening immediately, but I do think there is renewed optimism for that team in Halifax, which is why I wanted to make the video. With that pop-up stadium, I do think that opens the door potentially to getting a team in there in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm really interested to see what happens, but you guys will have to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.